James Lankford is a freshman member of the House Budget Committee, and he joins us now. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
Well, I guess the first question is, do you have a number in mind? Speaker Boehner reportedly has agreed to $33 billion in cuts. That, of course, was the initial proposal coming out from none other than Republican Congressman Paul Ryan in the early stages of all of this. I mean, do Republican freshmen recognize that some compromise will have to be made, seeing as how the Democrats control the Senate and the White House? They get that?
I do. I think there is a sense of that, but the reality is we've yet to see a real number and the details behind the number. We keep seeing these numbers that are floated out. There's a lot of details that are behind that is yet to ever come out.
Whose fault is that? Do you feel the Speaker hasn't sufficiently informed the conference?
I don't think the Senate has ever put anything out. I think that's part of the reality. When you go back to last year, even before I was here and before the other 87 Republican freshmen were here, the Democrats ran the House and the Senate. They did 3 different continuing resolutions because the Democrats couldn't agree on the budget. So then they punted to this year's Congress and said, you take it. The House did pass a budget, put themselves on record and said, this is what we believe. Then it passed 2 continuing resolutions, still waiting on the Senate to even pass 1. So that's a lot of the details that we're dealing with right now. What are they proposing? We don't know.
Well, it does sound like, though, that you could have some sort of compromise, that if it's a lower number than the $61 billion, you'll take it depending on the makeup of the cuts.
Sure, depending on what it is. We've got to be able to see the details on that. I'm going to go for as large of a cut as I can possibly get because I think the debt is overwhelming us. And to just continue to say we're going to just hold on to spending and keep it where it is, which is where the Democrats started with this. They said we're going to just keep the spending levels where they are right now, I think is the wrong way to go. So we're going to continue to push and say, you know what, America's future is counting on the fact that we're going to start pulling back this deficit.
You know, Congressman, I want to talk about Paul Ryan's budget that's out today, and one of the hallmarks of it has to do with a massive reforming of Medicare. And one of the things that Republicans are sort of pre-butting on this is, hey, don't let Democrats demagogue the Medicare issue. But all during 2009, I'm going to read you a TV ad that the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee ran in 2009. It said higher costs, tax hikes, and get this, massive cuts to Medicare. The Obama-Pelosi plan would cut Medicare by $500 billion, and Zach Space already voted for it. The Republicans did this in 2009. Do you think the party regrets this now, knowing that the politics of Medicare are so toxic?
No, they're completely different issues on that. I hate to play politics in the middle of that, but we're talking about if you're going to have cuts to Medicare, those investments should go back into Medicare. The difficulty in last year was they want to cut all that money and shift it to a new program. We're saying if you're making cuts to Medicare, you better invest it back into Medicare. And this plan is not a massive cut. It's a redesign of how we do it. It begins with the basics. If you are near retirement or in retirement, there is absolutely no change. So there's not the big scare tactic on it. But you've got to look at the future. If you're not being rational and realistic and saying the future does show that this thing gets out of balance and it cannot be sustained. We're trying to take a long-term look. Lots of people look at politicians and they say no one looks out long-term. We're looking long-term. That's where we're trying to head with this, say how do we stabilize this for the future?
Congressman, real quick question. If Paul Ryan's budget doesn't touch defense spending, can it be called a serious plan?
It absolutely touches every single area. It both reforms tax code. It looks to deal with things like defense. It starts putting us all on the table at Social Security and saying we're going to put a trigger in place to put everybody together. But it does deal with it. We're looking at what Robert Gates put out.
Is there a real tax loophole that gets cut, that gets closed in this? It doesn't seem as if it's been very hedgy as from Congressman Ryan and others that any actual tax loopholes get cut, which Grover Norquist would say is a tax hike if you close some of these.
Well, you better believe we're going to go after trying to simplify this tax system. That becomes the primary issue. Now, obviously, Ways and Means is the one that works out of the details. We're just setting the framework out and saying these are the areas that we believe as Republicans we need to go. And part of it's simplifying the system. Anyone working on their taxes right now can tell you the system is way too complicated. It's got to be simplified. Way too many issues with that code. It'll be better for our economy. It'll be better for our system if we can flatten it out. And it's the same thing the president said. We're agreeing and saying we got to get involved in this conversation.
All right, Congressman James Lankford, interesting times on the Hill. Thank you for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.